We begin today uttering the same words that Samuel spoke when God was calling. But this time we say it collectively. Speak, Lord, your servants are listening. Amen. May it be so. We began with our Old Testament passage with Samuel's calling. And I have to admit, upon this reading of it in preparation for today, I saw a comedy skit in my head. Something a little bit like maybe the Three Stooges or one of those good black and white films that had not very many words, a lot of music, but a lot of actions lived out, lifelike enactment. So what I saw and what I invite you maybe to see, if you have an imaginative mind and you'd like to go on this journey, trying to imagine this as a skit, you could throw in a few banana peels if you want to, maybe some fantastic music. But here we go. This is the story. We begin in a very calm setting with a boy laying down on his bed. And all of a sudden he starts up and he runs through the hallways to his master, who also is sleeping. The master sits up bleary-eyed and gestures for the boy to go back to bed. The boy scratches his head, but slowly wanders back to sleep. Then again, the same thing happens. The boy starts upright. He runs to his master and wakes his master up for the second time. This time, the master starts to frown a little bit and rub his face as he gestures more forcefully to the boy to go back to sleep. Go back to sleep. It's the middle of the night. Then finally, the third time, this happens again. And as the boy stands there perplexed with his hands raised, the master then claps his hands to his forehead, raises his finger to the sky, and then has an epiphany. We might even have the screen go very bright for this moment. This is when the master then gets out of bed himself, grasps the boy's shoulder, and talks very seriously to him. He then gently leads him back to bed and returns to his own vigil. No one is likely to sleep again tonight. And yet the boy's eyes grow heavy and he drifts off to sleep again. Eventually he sits up, he calmly kneels beside the bed and bows his head. This is the scene of God speaking for the very first time to Samuel, and it took 3 times for Samuel to be able to listen. So we see in this passage that God is patient. God is also persistent, doesn't give up, keeps calling, and is invitational. Now, I wonder how many times we might be able to relate to Samuel. We might miss or misinterpret a call from God to listen. It might even be a call from others to listen to us. I know if I'm far off in my own little world thinking of things and someone says something to me, sometimes I don't hear them at all. I need an extra moment to come back and really attend and listen. So it can also be the case when we're listening for God that it's a bit like this. God might be persistently trying to urge us towards something or invite us to do something or even just to be. And yet I really think many times when I'm in pain or I'm distracted or feeling busy, it's not so easy to make time and space to listen for God. And sometimes it's long after the fact that hindsight offers the perspective to see, that's what God was up to, or, oh, maybe that was an opportunity to do something differently. And then the shoulda, coulda, wouldas arrive to make me wonder what might have been. So what good news that God doesn't give up. What good news that God keeps trying and keeps calling to us. We needn't beat ourselves up when we might miss messages or not listen, but we can renew our efforts to tune in for next time because God won't stop. We could perhaps liken this to being like little radios that we're trying to tune into God's frequency, and we need subtle deafness to our fingers in our practice so that we can join in with what God is up to. And yet, maybe not so much little radios with dials that we have to twiddle. Maybe we're a little bit like ear trumpets sometimes, trying to hear the buzz of a bee in a field away. As vessels, we often experience our limitations of listening. Could be our human busyness or lethargy, tiredness, even bloody-minded stubbornness could keep us from God. And yet, God trusts us with the good news, invites us to take rest, and often works around or even through what is going on with us. In the epistle today, St. Paul wrote to the Corinthian community expressing what it means to live with our human limitations as people of faith. The mystery that God trusts us with life in abundance, regardless of our mistakes or our weaknesses. He wrote, "We have this treasure in clay jars, so that it may be made clear that this extraordinary power belongs to God and does not come from us. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed, perplexed, but not driven to despair, persecuted, but not forsaken, struck down, but not destroyed, always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be made visible in our bodies." Let's think for a moment of ourselves as clay jars holding treasure. Clay jars, they're incredibly delicate vessels. They can crack very easily with changes of temperature. Certainly, if they are dropped and smashed, whatever is inside them will go everywhere. We're very fragile in that sense, and that's us as people too, very fragile. And yet, we can live out the power of God because God still chooses to work through us. This is not our powers, but it is God's powers. So this can be a tremendous relief for those of us who feel imperfect or wounded or even useless from time to time. God can join us with Christ's movement no matter what state we are in, no matter what state of health or ill health we might experience. In the gospel passage today, we encounter Jesus healing on the Sabbath, the day of rest during the week. He encounters a man who has a withered hand and someone who society during Jesus' time would have blamed for his disability. He would have likely been shunned and ignored by most people. So by healing him, Jesus not only breaks the cultural expectation of Sabbath observance, as it was understood in his religion, but it's also breaking the societal norm of casting off people who had physical ailment, as they were often seen to be suffering because of sinfulness, and therefore people shouldn't interfere with that. So here, Christ models for us the compassion that we're to extend to each other. Anyone who is living on the edge of society can often be hard to love. And yet we are called to do just that, even when it doesn't suit us. People who have differences, people who have extra needs, or who require new measures to be able to live in community with others. We are called to love. Now, we are also called to extend the same compassion to ourselves, to the parts of us that we would rather not deal with, or the parts of us that we would like to shun or cast off. Because these parts, like all of us, are loved by God. So we are called to give ourselves rest, perhaps from the judgmental inner voices which can often drown out God. Because God knows that we are broken, fragile vessels, but loves us anyway. God knows that we struggle, but calls us to serve anyway. God knows that we do often get it wrong, but invites us to try again anyway. So what keeps us back from receiving this love or living out this compassion? What holds us back from basking in the service that Christ calls us to live out? What stops us from answering the invitation? What are we afraid of? Well, our holy hermit that we remember this weekend might be able to help us with this. St. Teresa of Los Andes, in her very short life, answered the call to a life of service and was a vessel for God's love, even with her limitations. We know she had a temper. We know that she was often stubborn and that she likely was a bit grumpy from time to time. And yet, the way that she describes God's living within her is beautiful. These are the words that she wrote. I feel full of God. There is no separation between us. Wherever I go, he is with me, within me. I live with him. So Teresa, as Chile's first beloved saint who channeled so much of Christ's message to the world around her, she did die at the age of 20 and offers us wisdom even at that young age, much like Samuel, who was called young too. The wisdom from her writings reassures us that coming to God is the way we become whole at any stage of our lives and in any state that we find ourselves. She said this, are you perhaps afraid that the abyss of the greatness of God and that of your nothingness cannot be united? There is love in him. His passionate love made him take flesh in order that by seeing a man God, we would not be afraid to draw near him. The passionate love made him become bread in order to assimilate our nothingness and make it disappear into his infinite being. I'm going to offer that one last time, and I invite you to really feel Teresa speaking through these words to each of us, asking us this question to ponder. Are you perhaps afraid that the abyss of the greatness of God and that of your nothingness cannot be united? There is love in him. His passionate love made him take flesh, that in order by seeing a man God, we would not be afraid to draw near to him. This passionate love made him become bread in order to assimilate our nothingness and make it disappear into his infinite being. So however you're feeling called to answer, maybe a call to listen, maybe a call to draw near to God afresh, to allow Christ's light to heal and make us whole, to transform any part of us that is broken so that we can still be vessels that hold treasure in clay jars. There's another offering for us to help us to really see how known and loved we are by God, that God sees all of us and loves all of us, even those broken parts. And this is our psalm for today, which is a firm favorite with many. Psalm 139 celebrates that known by Godness and the invitation to invite God to move in, through, and with us in how we live from here on out. So you might like to close your eyes for this. Feel welcome as I offer this psalm, not in the usual language it's written, but in collective language for all of us. Psalm 139. O Lord, you have searched us out and known us. You know when we sit or when we stand. You comprehend our thoughts long before. You discern our paths and the places where we rest. You are acquainted with all our ways. For there is not a word on our tongues, but you, Lord, know it altogether. You have encompassed us behind and before. You have laid your hand upon us. Such knowledge is too wonderful for us, so high that we cannot endure it. Where shall we go from your spirit? Or where shall we flee from your presence? We will praise you, for you are to be praised. Awesome are your acts and wonderful your works. You knew our souls and our bones were not hidden from you when we were formed in secret and woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw our limbs when they were yet imperfect, and in your book were all our days written. Day by day they were fashioned, and not one was late in growing. How deep are your thoughts to us, O God, and how great is the sum of them. Were we to count them, they are more in number than the sand. Were we to come to the end, we will still be with you. Amen.